How's it going, everyone? Patch 10.1 has been out for a few weeks now, and I hope you're all enjoying it as much as I am. Enhancement Shaman did receive some rotation changes this patch due to our new tier set and some talent buffs. So I thought it would be a good time to go ahead and make an updated rotation guide for the Elementalist setup, and in the future I'll also do a rotation guide for the physical build, or what's really being called the Storm build now. In this video I'm going to cover 3 variations of the Elementalist build, one more single target focused, one more AOE focused, and then a third build that's more of an in-between and more funnel focused build. We'll go over the talent setups themselves and the priority list for the rotation. I won't go line by line on them like I did in the original videos I did on these, but we will go over the main differences in the rotation and the reasoning behind them, and then we will go through some scenarios as well. As a final note, I'm not going to go over the Shaman talent tree side of things in this. I'm only going to cover the Enhancement talent tree. The Shaman talent tree itself is going to really vary depending on the specific content you're doing, and I'll probably make a video talking more about that and the utility we can bring to different fights sometime in the future. For now though, the only thing you really need to know about the Shaman talent tree is that it is expected for you to always be taking Lava Burst as well as Frost Shock. Let's go ahead and start off with a AOE build here. Now, this is probably going to look very familiar to you if you're playing Enhancement Shaman in 10.1 because, well, the build for this hasn't changed at all actually. The one thing that I do want to go ahead and address here is Wind Fairy Totem. I had a lot of people ask me if they should or shouldn't be using this in Mythic Plus, and the answer is, well, it kind of depends. If your main goal is just to push 20 keys and fill up your vault for the week, then you can probably get by without it. But if you're trying to push as high of keys as possible and you're running with DPS to benefit from it, then you probably should be using it. And if you do end up running Wind Fairy Totem, I would definitely recommend running Totemic Projection in the Shaman talent tree and then macroing that to either your Lava Lash or Storm Strike or some other ability that you're using frequently. That way, Wind Fairy Totem is always moving with you. With that, let's move on over to the priority list. Do keep in mind that this priority list is assuming that you at least have your tier 2 set bonus and that Flame Shock is already applied to your targets. This is really not much different from how it was in 10.0. The main difference is going to be that Sundering has jumped up quite a bit in priority, and this is again due to the tier set bonus, giving us both mastery from the 2 sets and increased physical and fire damage from the 4 set bonus. Outside of that, the main other thing that changed is that Chain Lightning has jumped up in priority if you do have 10 Maelstrom weapon stacks. And if you are wondering why exactly Chain Lightning is higher priority than Sundering when we already have 10 Maelstrom weapon stacks, it's because Sundering does generate us quite a bit of Maelstrom weapon, so we do want to try to spend our stacks if we're already capped out on it to avoid waste. Aside from that, the idea behind the rotation is still use Feral Spirit as much as possible, use Primordial Wave as much as possible, and get Lightning Bolts off when you have Flame Shock spread to 6 targets. And then you of course want to maintain Crash Lightning, as well as be cycling targets with Lava Lash in order to spread Lashing Flames to as many targets as you can. And lastly, of course, you want to be using those Hailstorm stacks as much as you can as well, because Hailstorm is going to provide a huge chunk of our damage. Alright, let's take a quick look at a scenario. For this scenario, we'll have 4 targets, all of which have Flame Shock already applied to them, and 2 of which already have the Lashing Flames debuff applied. We will assume that both Feral Spirit and Primordial Wave are both on cooldown. We are in a hot ham window, meaning that we can be using the Lava Lash every other GCD. The buff from Crash Lightning is already active. We don't have any Hailstorm stacks. And we have 5 Maelstrom weapon stacks that will continue to go up as we use abilities. To start off, we'll have to look about halfway down the priority list to Sundering. We can then follow that up with a Lava Lash on one of the 2 targets that does not have Lashing Flames applied to it. And then we can look down towards Ice Strike. And once again, we can cast Lava Lash on our 4th target. That way, all of our targets will now have Lashing Flames applied to them. We continue to look further down the priority list and we now cast a Storm Strike, and this gets us to 10 Maelstrom weapon stacks, so we can go ahead and cast a Chain Lightning. This then generates us 10 stacks of Hailstorm, so we want to go ahead and use a Frost Shock here. And lastly, we can go ahead and use a Crash Lightning because its damage is buffed up by using the Chain Lightning beforehand. As a final note on the AOE build, I had plenty of people ask me in the last video what happens when you're running this build and you make it to, say, a boss or some sort of single target scenario, and the answer is that the priority is going to look something like this. This is going to be very similar to what our single target rotation is, with a focus on using Lava Lash during hot hand windows, while also still getting off Primordial Wave and Power Lightning Bolts as much as possible, using Feral Spirits as much as possible, and then because we don't have Elemental Blast in this build, we'll instead be using Lava Burst when it's available and Lightning Bolt when it's not available. Chain Lightning is also going to be used in the single target rotation due to our new tier set as well, and we'll talk about that more when we get to the priority list for the single target build. But for now, I think this wraps up everything on the AOE build. Let's jump over to the single target build. Looking at the single target build, the main thing you'll notice is probably going to be the bottom right portion of the tree is actually filled in now. Thanks to some buffs to the static accumulation and Thorum's Invocation talent, going Ascendance in single target on the elemental setup is actually worthwhile now. Thorum's Invocation providing bonus damage to both Lightning Bolts and Chain Lightning is pretty nice, especially because we will be using Chain Lightning in single target thanks to our foresight bonus. And Static Accumulation now giving us a chance for those two spells to refund the Maelstrom weapon stacks is really nice, because when we get those refunds, we're actually getting cooldown back on Feral Spirits as well, meaning more wolves up, which is a all-around boost to our damage. This section of the tree also provides us quite a bit of Maelstrom stack generation while Ascendance is active too, which is always nice to have. The other big change with this build is the fact that we're no longer taking the Overflowing Maelstrom talent, which means that every time we use a spender, whether it be Lightning Bolts or Chain Lightning or Elemental Blast, we're only going to be using 5 Maelstrom stacks at a time rather than 10 like we were in the past. The reasoning for this is we actually want to get as many Lightning Bolts off as possible in order to get the refund from Static Accumulation, and in order to do that, we need to spend as few stacks on Elemental Blast as possible. So by not taking Overflowing Maelstrom, we limit Elemental Blast to only being able to use 5 Maelstrom weapon stacks at a time, and that way we're able to get as many Lightning Bolts in as possible while still getting the buff from Elemental Blast. The last thing that I'm going to go ahead and address on the build here is the fact that we are still putting a single point into Primordial Wave. Even though we're not pathing all the way down to Splintered Elements on this, Primordial Wave still provides us a powerful burst of damage on a 45-second cooldown, which is obviously very short. And other than that, there's really not another great place to put this one point into, so Primordial Wave is going to provide us the most value. And with that, let's go ahead and take a quick look at the priority list. Once again, this rotation is going to look fairly similar to what we saw in 10.0. The main focus is still going to be using Lava Lash as much as you can during hot hand windows, and making sure that Elemental Blast is never sitting on 2 charges. We of course also want to prioritize using Elemental Blast while Feral Spirits are active. What's going to be different about this build is the fact that, once again, like the AOE build, Sundering has moved up in priority thanks to our tier set bonus, and then we also see Windstrike on this list now as well because we are running Ascendance. And this is going to be something that is a high priority use when we're in those Ascendance windows, but we do want to make sure that our Thorum's Invocation is primed with a Lightning Bolt prior to going into Ascendance. And the reason we need to watch out for this is because Chain Lightning is actually in our priority list. Now this seems really weird because this is single target, but because of our foresight bonus, we do want to use 2 Chain Lightnings after we get a Sundering off, because Chain Lightning's damage is boosted by that, and it does better damage than Lightning Bolt. And it refunds us Maelstrom weapon stacks, which contributes to our Feral Spirit cooldown coming back faster. Let's go ahead and switch over to a scenario so we can see how this looks in action. For this scenario, we can assume that we only have one target that already has Flame Shock applied to it. We'll also assume that Sundering is on cooldown, but recently used, leaving Chain Lightning primed for Thorum's Invocation. Ascendance and Primordial Wave are both off of cooldown, and we currently have 10 Maelstrom weapon stacks. Because Ascendance is off cooldown, we of course want to be looking to use that, but because Thorum's Invocation is currently primed with Chain Lightning, let's go ahead and use our Maelstrom weapon stacks to start off with a Lightning Bolt. And now that Thorum's Invocation is going to be primed with a Lightning Bolt, we can go ahead and cast Ascendance. We then follow that up by casting a Windstrike, and we aren't currently in a hot hand window, so we're going to look down to casting an Elemental Blast next. The reason that we can cast this here is because we don't have Overflowing Maelstrom, so even though we started with 10 Maelstrom stacks at the beginning and then casted a Lightning Bolt, that still left us with 5 Maelstrom weapon stacks remaining, allowing us to now cast this. Next, we can go ahead and cast Windstrike again, Because we're in Ascendance, you should be able to cast Windstrike pretty much every other GCD unless you get a Stormbringer proc, in which case you would just keep casting Windstrike over and over and over. At this point, we haven't gained enough Maelstrom weapon stacks back to cast another one of our spinders right now, so we need to look all the way down to casting Primordial Wave here, which we then go ahead and follow up with another Windstrike afterwards. And finally, now that we are back up to 5 Maelstrom weapon stacks, we can go ahead and cast a Lightning Bolt here, which will be buffed up thanks to the Primordial Wave we casted just a few spells ago. Finally, the last build we're going to look at here is going to be the funnel build, and this is going to look identical to the build that you're probably running the most in 10.0, at least when it came to the raid. And this does of course look very similar to the single target build. The only difference is going to be that instead of putting our points into the Ascendance path at the bottom right of the tree, we're putting all of our points into the Primordial Wave path at the bottom left of the tree. We are also taking a point in Overflowing Maelstrom from this, unlike the single target build. Now, why exactly is this referred to as a funnel build? The idea behind it is that if we have several targets, but one of them is a priority target, this build will allow us to funnel more damage into that priority target by spreading Flame Shock onto the other target. And the way this works really comes down to two of our talents. The first is Splintered Elements. When we generate a Lightning Bolt from Primordial Wave, Splintered Elements increases our haste by 10% for each additional Lightning Bolt generated, meaning that this gives us a boost of up to 60% additional haste that allows us to pump more spells into that priority target. The second important talent for this is Ashen Catalyst. This makes it so each tick of Flame Shock gives us a stacking buff that increases the damage of our next Lava Lash by 12% and reduces its cooldown by half a second. This is really great for funneling more damage into a target, because the more Flame Shocks we have applied to more targets, the faster we get these stacks and the more damage each one of our Lava Lashes is doing on our priority target. When it comes to the priority list for this build, it's going to look more similar to the single target priority list than it will to the AOE priority list. The main thing we're going to worry about here is using Lava Lash during our hot hand windows. Generally, this is going to be just putting all of those Lava Lashes into our main priority target. You can spread Lashing Flames if the ads are going to live long enough, but if you mainly have one priority target and a lot of short-lived ads around it, then you probably don't really need to worry about spreading Lashing Flames nearly as much, because it's not going to be as worthwhile as just pumping all of that damage into prio target. Elemental Blast is also going to be our main Maelstrom weapon spender here, assuming that Feral Spirit is active or we are at 2 charges of it. Outside of that, we'll just be using Chain Lightning to spin our stacks on. That way we are doing a little bit of additional cleave on the ads that might be up. Moving along to a scenario for this, we can assume that we have 3 targets, one of which is a priority target that we will be funneling damage into. We'll also say that Feral Spirit is currently active, but Primordial Wave and Sundering are both on cooldown. We don't currently have any Maelstrom weapon stacks, but let's say that we recently spent some stacks and now have Hailstorm stacks left over. And we will also say that we are in a hot hand window. Because our main cooldowns are currently on cooldown, and we don't have any Maelstrom weapon stacks, we can go ahead and look down to using Lava Lash because we are in that hot hand window. Once again, the main idea here is going to be that I'm putting all of these Lava Lashes into my priority target. And because we're in that hot hand window, we can also assume that every other GCD is going to be a Lava Lash. So let's go ahead and fill those in. The next thing we'll look at is using Ice Strike here, which is then followed up by our second Lava Lash cast. We will now want to use Frost Shock because we do have those Hailstorm stacks to expend. And then once again our third Lava Lash cast, which brings us back up to 5 Maelstrom weapon stacks. So now we can look to use Elemental Blast because Feral Spirit is active. Once again, we have another Lava Lash cast here. And then lastly, we'll have to look all the way down to Storm Strike here because Ice Strike and Frost Shock will still likely be on cooldown at this point. Finally, to round out this video, let's talk about when exactly you should be using each of these builds. Mythic Plus is pretty straightforward. You would be using the AOE build. There's no reason to ever run the funnel build or the single target build there. AOE build is definitely the way to go. When it comes to raid, it is much more fight dependent. Aberrus is home to quite a few single target boss fights like Kazara, Rashok, Amalgamation Chamber, and Magma Axe, which the single target build is obviously going to work well on. The Assault of the Zakali fight is going to be a great place for the AOE build to be able to shine, and for most of the other fights, the funnel build is going to work out pretty well because it will provide some additional cleave damage in order to help kill the adds on those fights, and with those adds being up frequently enough, it allows us to spread Flame Shock to several targets and get Primordial Wave and Powered Lightning Bolts off to hit multiple targets and give us additional haste, plus give us those Ashen Catalyst stacks even quicker, allowing us to funnel more damage into the lost target. I did mark the fights with the single target build with an asterisk though, and the reason for that is if you are looking to min-max your damage, then the single target Storm build is actually doing higher damage for enhancement right now than the Elementalist setup, and I'll be covering this in a future video. But for now, I think that wraps up everything I wanted to cover in this video. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think in the comments below.